Hi, good afternoon, everybody. On this occasion of World Cord Blood Day, we thought that we'd share with you some thoughts. We actually wanted to ask you a question. Okay, sorry. You are wondering who I am. I am actually the technical director of Cord Life, and I've been working with this cord blood bank since its inception. And all of us have waded through deeper waters. Now we are actually going towards the final stages of cord blood banking and its usage. The usage has been very good till date. So we're going to share with you some thoughts today. The thoughts might be a bit different than what we think about. What we think today and what we're going to share with you is in the event of stem cell banking, have you ever wondered that what you actually store? Is it just for treatment or is there anything else? So today, if I ask you a question like, we're going to put you in a room which is dark, which has got a bed, no doubt, very scanty food, very scanty drinks, but you're going to get a mobile of your choice with a very good internet connection. And another choice which will be given to you would be a suite in a five-star hotel with a well-stocked refrigerator, but no mobile, no internet connection. I think the current generation would be choosing the first one and not the latter. Because when Alexander Graham Bell actually discovered the telephone, which his wife, on hearing hello, exclaimed, "My God, it talks." But today's Zen Y is not interested if a telephone talks. They're interested if it can take a good photograph. They're interested in if it can show you current movies which are there on the internet. It's actually a substitute for a computer, for a telephone, for a camera, for plenty of things. In fact, I remember switching on and off my air conditioner in my room using my mobile phone. So think of the transition that a phone has made from the time of Alexander Graham Bell till today. It's been about 200 years. Think of a concept which has just come into existence in the last 40 years. The cord blood was conceptualized as a receptacle, as something which contained certain cells. It was done as early as 1983. It was Dr. Hal Broxmeyer who in 1985 actually discovered that other than the red cells, white cells, and the platelets, which are the components of blood, the cord blood contained a peculiar population of cells known as stem cells, which was enough to rebuild all the components of blood by repopulating the bone marrow. That is the factory which synthesizes blood and its components. As a proof of concept, the first umbilical cord blood transplantation, successful one, happened in Paris with the hands of Professor Ilian Glackman, and the rest is history. The first umbilical cord blood transplantation from Fanconi's anemia for rebuilding of the bone marrow. The first trial outside the non-cancer gamut was the cancer gamut of acute blood cancer. The first umbilical cord blood transplantation for adult blood cancer was done in 1995. First chronic myelogenous leukemia transplantation was done in 1997. And the first umbilical cord blood transplantation for a inherited blood red cell disorder that is known as sickle cell anemia was done in 1988. So think of the journey from 1988 to 1998. There was only one indication in 1988, whereas the indications became around 8 by around 9 years. The first cord blood, which was expanded and it was transplanted in 2012. In 2016, under the cord blood transplantation success scenario, there were more than 80 disorders which were added. In 2020, which is and would be a year to remember for a lot of things, there are more than 1,300 clinical trials which have happened for more than 40 plus disorders over and above the 80 disorders which are already been there. And that includes the pandemic causing virus COVID-19's recovery. So there are currently over more than 400 private banks where more than 40 lakh parents have stored their baby's umbilical cord blood, and there have been more than 40,000 umbilical cord blood stem cell transplantations across the globe. All these people, 40 lakh parents, why did they choose to store their baby's umbilical cord blood derived stem cells? For some, it was a life savior. The first case of thalassemia was cured by the cord blood group from an umbilical cord blood transplantation for which the umbilical cord blood of the normal sister was stored. This happened way back in 2010 for Cord Life Sciences India. The second was that for a child suffering from acute myelogenous leukemia. But for both these cases, there is a similarity. Here, the parents knew that the child who was suffering from these disorders could only be cured through a transplantation of a sibling cord blood. That means a brother or sister's normal matched umbilical cord blood was the only way to cure these children of the disorders that they were born with. So they conceived another child which was normal. Luckily, they were HLA matched and the umbilical cord blood was transplanted and these children got cured. So it was a life savior for many. This example I'm sharing with you because this is one of our latest achievements. That is, during the pandemic, we had assisted in doing a transplantation for sickle cell anemia. This was different in plenty of aspects. The mother had actually opted for the elder son to become cured of sickle cell disorder, and she had actually conceived a baby who was normal and who was HLA matched. This child's cord blood was stored, but it was post transplant. It was post something known as a pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. Once this pre-implantation genetic diagnosis was done, it was not suffering. Unborn child was not being and the umbilical cord was used to treat for thalassemia. What happened next? It had been done at the time of the pandemic. It had been done at the time of pandemic. But afterwards, these children had to stay in India for a pretty long time. The entire system, the entire expenditure which they had done for the sickle cell transplant was reimbursed to them for an insurance. And when they left India after overstaying for about 4 or 5 months, they had not only got a normal child, the elder child who was cured of sickle cell disorder, a second child which they already knew were not suffering from sickle cell disorder, but also their entire expenditure of staying in India and the transplantation was reimbursed. So these are the stories, the small stories, where the mother and fathers knew that while conceiving the child, that it would be a savior for the elders. So they are among the 50,000 other parents who have cured their elder children of certain disorders by doing these kind of transplants. These parents knew that they could have saved their children by using their siblings' cord blood. But this particular child's father or this particular child's mother did not know that their child would be suffering from a disorder after birth. The first child was suffering from cerebral palsy, and the second was suffering from neuroblastoma. 50% of the samples that have been released by CordLife till date were for such autologous uses, where the cord blood was actually stored in good faith. The children of these parents who never dreamed that their baby would be suffering from any type of disorder, but they had actually planned ahead just in case it would be required to revive their child of some disorder. So for cerebral palsy and neuroblastoma, these two children got cured because their fathers and mothers had planned in advance. Whereas there is a scenario where it was planned, there was a scenario where it was unplanned. But people knew that these disorders could be treated or were in the pipeline. Then suddenly, in 2020, we came across a particular disease caused by a virus known as SARS-CoV-2, or more colloquially known as COVID-19. And there was a frantic search in every nook and cranny to see what would be able to cure or what would be able to reduce patients who were suffering from COVID-19. Cord blood and cord tissue stem cells promising results come near-term recovery of hereditary patients. And there are two clinical trials in only 2 countries, which 50 clinical trials are using cord and cord blood. These are various snippets which you can see where various types of cells which are being isolated from the cord tissue and cord blood have been used to treat COVID-19. Treatment of severe COVID-19 using human cord blood mesenchymal stem cells. Then treatment of severe COVID-19 using human cord mesenchymal stem cells and umbilical cord blood, where the cord blood has been used for various reasons. But though all these were randomized clinical trials where COVID-related pneumonia and other things have been done, what basically people they never thought that the umbilical cord blood would be used to treat COVID-19. People knew that the COVID-19 was creating something known as a cytokine storm. They knew that the body's own immune system was being used against it for the entire pathogenesis of COVID-19, and it was causing extensive damage to the lungs, the kidneys, the heart, and all other organs. And the umbilical cord blood was the only therapeutic option available at that particular point of time because it contained a lot of naive cells which could reset the body's dysregulated immune thermostat. It could combat the cytokine storm, and lastly, to also restructure and rebuild the damaged lungs or the kidneys or the heart to a certain extent, such that they could get cured or at least near cured using this umbilical cord and cord blood therapy for COVID-19. And all these studies are still ongoing. So who can say that the stage might be saved by umbilical cord or cord tissue therapy today? Number two, this is the pandemic which is here today. This is not the first pandemic, possibly this will not be the last pandemic. If this pandemic can be saved by umbilical cord and cord blood related stem cells, possibly tomorrow another therapeutic option would be coming for another pandemic using these umbilical cord and cord blood therapies. Let us see if there is anything else that we might be talking about. So, what are the parents' common wishes for their baby? Number one, they store their cord blood and every other thing to secure a healthy life for their baby. They'll go to any lengths to do it. They also should be made to think that the umbilical cord blood would prove them or show them of a better direction towards a better life. First, this 25 ml of cord blood, if it is cryopreserved, we know that it can be a therapeutic option. It can be a treatment option. Treatment option for what? Treatment option for those 80 plus diseases for which we know it is a therapy. For those 40 plus diseases for which currently the clinical trials are going on, which should become a standard therapy any time from now, because this progress has been made in the last about 25 to 30 years, and the latest progress has been in the last 10 years. It would also be a therapeutic option for a pandemic today and should become another therapeutic option if there is a pandemic tomorrow. But let us think a little beyond treatment or therapy. What would that be? Can it offer a direction towards a better life? Let's see. When you have the umbilical cord blood, which is being stored in the cryogenic tank, we know that the cells are being stored. Once the cells are being stored, the answer is yes, because it is a therapeutic option. But once the cells are being stored, the umbilical cord blood banking also means that we are preserving the material which is there inside the cell's nucleus, which is known as the DNA. They are being stored as the 0-day DNA at birth. That means we know that these cells which are being stored have not been exposed to any medicines, any drugs, any radiation, any pollutants, or for that matter, any kind of disorder causing chemicals that is outside the human body, because these cells are naive. These cells are just born as it is with the baby. It also means that the intracellular contents, the content inside the cell, that is the DNA, have also been intact, and they have not been touched by these pollutants. They have not been touched by the day-to-day dietary activity or any other health-related issues. That means we are actually also preserving the 0-day DNA at birth. What does this mean? That means if a child today, we don't know, has the susceptibility to suffer or has something in the DNA that can be analyzed today, this cord blood DNA gives us a completely different dimension. That is, this DNA is the genetic blueprint that defines us, and a sequencing which is done from that gene and an analysis, if it is done from that gene which is 0-day old, will actually give us a map of how this child would be behaving later. And as a child's journey begins today, as the baby is born, the journey begins today, and the journey is not very smooth. The child will get exposed to environmental pollution, the child will get exposed to antibiotics, drugs, the child will get exposed to environmental pollutants, the child will get exposed to radiation, the child will get exposed to plenty of things, including viral and bacterial disorders. All these disorders, all these influences will leave an imprint on the DNA. That imprint on the DNA might change the DNA a little bit. Once a DNA is changed, that means it is going to change the child a bit. This small change might have profound implications of the child's future. If this DNA is kept with us, which is day zero, and as the child grows, if the same DNA is reanalyzed later, which can be stored with the umbilical cord blood as a separate segment, it can be reanalyzed, it can be compared, and it can predict if there has been any acquired gene defect or any mutations that has happened since birth. So we are introducing you to a new topic known as predictive genomics and precision medicine. This predictive genomics, if it is done today from the nascent cord blood that is there in the baby, we would not only know if the child has got the propensity or is at risk of suffering from some disorder later on or not, for which adequate precautions might be taken today. But we can also think of a situation where if you want the child to go for athletics, if the child has got an athletic gene, if the child has got a talent towards sports, just by having the talent and not having the proper muscle to live up to the contact sports means nothing. So along with the talent, we should also analyze the genes to see if the child has got that what it takes to go for a contact sport. That means the muscles, are they made, are they genetically there or made for the contact sports? We can know about this from the genetic study of the child if it is done on day zero. If the child has got any inborn error of metabolism, like if the child will be able to tolerate a particular food, or the child will be able to digest, will be having allergies, these things can be done by predictive genomics, which can be availed today with a particular thing which is stored with the umbilical cord blood, and that is there in the DNA, and that can be analyzed, and these reports can be made available such that the child gets to live a better life. What else? Today, a child has got normal health. It might be that the child has got something to do with the fat disorder in the child's genes. So if you restrict the fat intake, or if you restrict the food, or if you rightly titrate the food that the child take today, tomorrow the child who's having a risk towards having a cardiovascular disorder might be prevented. It is like the hypertriglyceridemia gene. It might be there. So these are various aspects which is predictive genomics, and next is going to come precision medicine. Where is precision medicine going to come into account? If the child today has got a disorder, the commonest would be a blood disorder known as blood cancer or leukemia. If the child is supposed to take a particular medicine, we'll know if this medicine is going to work in this particular baby in the long run when the child actually gets a disease, or it can happen. So if we talk about this, that is where the predictive genomics and precision medicine is going to come into play. So today, if we think about infant development, the umbilical cord blood, which is being stored today, and the genetic analysis is done at day zero, we can identify if the child is having any of the genetic disorders, not by indirect testing of urine or anything else, not by pricking the child in the heel, but by doing the test from the leftover umbilical cord blood, which will never be used as a vehicle for transplantation. At 6 months, when the child is supposed to get weaned from the breast milk, there you can do, or the analysis can be done, where we'll be able to identify specific food allergies, vitamin status, gluten allergy. All these things are going to come in such that you can actually make the food which suits the baby, supplement the proper vitamins which is lacking, or take away certain vitamins which might be in excess. Now, when the child is about 5 years old, you might start thinking of what you want this child to be in future. Do you want this child to become a good scholar? Do you want this child to become a sportsman? Do you want this child to become an advocate or a lawyer? Not only can you start judging from the speech skills, from the memory skills, and plenty of other things, you can go on and see the physical resilience of the child, the sports genes of the child, the memory of the child, the wake up pattern of the child, and of course, food and allergy. After 5 years, at 10 years, and every 10-year intervals, the child's genes can be analyzed from the saliva or from any other non-invasive material. We can actually say if the child who has been exposed to all the adversities of nature has actually taken any mutations or not. Have the genes changed since birth? Because as the child's genes are already there with us in the form of umbilical cord blood, which can be analyzed at any point of time, and we can get the 0-day data. And when we compare it with the data obtained at 10 years and every 10-year intervals, we'll be able to assess if the child has taken in any adverse mutations or not in the genes, and similar predictions about health can be done. Not only this, from this analysis, we can know if the preventive aspects which was taken when the child was 6 months old or 5 years old, have they taken in any effect on the child who's now on the verge of becoming an adult. So that is very important when this comparison comes in, and we can do changes on various needs like need of diet, need of allergy, need of various other disorders like the propensity to develop malignancies, the propensity to develop lifestyle disorders, and plenty of things. So this is what we wanted to share with you today, thinking about why should you be storing your child's cord blood. It is not all about a therapy. It is not all about a treatment. It is bioinsurance, no doubt. It is medical insurance, no doubt. Is it also the genetic information that you're storing today? I think let us not break it up into bioinsurance, medical insurance, and genetic information. It is actually all in one. So, what cord blood can do to you, it is not only the therapeutic aspect, it is not only a treatment option for you and your family for the disorders today, it is also a therapeutic option for certain disorders which are undergoing clinical trials currently and hold a promise for tomorrow. It might be for a radiation hazard if a nuclear holocaust has to occur. Then even the bone marrow can be rescued using this cord blood. And thinking of a pandemic which might come in day after tomorrow, we'll be ready for that using cord blood. But is that all? No. It also bears the genetic information of today. It also bears the entire DNA profile at day 0, which actually is an index which can be compared to the genetic information, which might be analyzed from these children later on to see, number one, what was the child's status on day 0? What were the disease propensities or the disease risks or the good things that were shown in that information that was taken from the genes at day 0, and the preventive aspects that were instituted? Did they have any effect? Did they have any effect on the mutation causing analysis? Did they have anything else? And tomorrow you can compare your performance of having preventive genetics of what you do 10 years from now, 20 years from now, and compare with the genetic information that has been stored with you on day 0 in the form of umbilical cord blood banking. I'll just quote saying what Jack Ma said: you will not turn bankrupt because of buying insurance, but you will cause your loved ones to turn bankrupt if you don't. Everyone goes in for a small amount of money as an investment, for a security, for purchasing something known as insurance, hoping always that they won't require it. That is, today, if you want to buy a fire insurance from your house, you won't like your house to come up on fire such that you have to use the insurance. But if God forbid, actually your house is on fire, you'll be able to encash at least the monetary part of it through the insurance. So what is cord blood? The cord blood, today, everyone thinks of it as an insurance parameter. Why? Because tomorrow, if you get a disease or a disorder which is treatable by cord blood, you are assured of a unit which is sitting there in the cord blood bank, in the cryogenic repository, which can be made available for any disorder within 7 to 10 working days to any corner of the world. But is that all? No. It also is a vehicle by which you can know the genetic information today. It is going to help you to act. Today, if you see any risk, you'll get a second deal of information tomorrow. It is going to help you to plan your child's future such that today, when you know if your child is going to become a Pullela Gopichand or he's going to become Usain Bolt, you can get it in his genes. So you can nurture the child in proper way on the genomic information that has been given to you. Number 3, most important is if the child has got any risk towards development of a disorder which is known as a lifestyle disorder like cardiovascular disease, diabetes, or any other disorders like cancer, the child might be counseled on his or her diet to become a healthy adult tomorrow. If the child by any chance gets a malignancy, then the malignancy can be treated using the bioinformatics tool of precision medicine. And moreover, if you properly prevented your child from developing a disorder today, by giving all the best things in life, you'll be able to compare the day 0 genes with the 10-year, 20 or a 30-year genetic profile to actually have your report card, which will be made, which will be in front of you, saying this child at day 0 was predicted to be having such a disorder at a later age if certain preventive aspects were not done. But alas, today I'm sitting at 30 years comparing the genetic report, seeing those risks are still there, but the child's associated genomics, the preventive aspects were taken by their moms and dads at the proper time, such that they did not develop these diseases at a later date. So my message to all pregnant couples, the moms to be and the dads to be, who are waiting for their baby to be born, bank your baby's cord blood. Bank your baby's cord blood. Plan for the banking of your baby's cord blood today to open up the possibilities. There are only 2 steps that you actually need to do. I think the step 1 that you've already completed, that is by attending this session. What has this session given you? This session, I think now, has opened your minds to think beyond the therapeutic or the treatment potential of the umbilical cord blood, which is stored in the cryogenic repository under minus 196 degrees Celsius with us. It is also a fingerprint of the DNA that the child was born with. The only difference between the fingerprint and the genetics or the DNA information is the fingerprint is sacrosanct throughout a person's life. It never gets influenced by anything. But the DNA that you're having today and the DNA that you'll be having after a journey of life of 30, 35, 40, 45 years is actually riddled with thorns known as mutations, which might change your life. So if you can give something to prevent it today, you'll get the proof that you've actually prevented it tomorrow, or if you have acquired anything new tomorrow. That is very important. So for step 2, what we require you to do is give us a call to know more about these future aspects of umbilical cord blood banking and the newer aspects of umbilical cord blood banking. The number is there for you. I also want to share that after you've asked us questions in the session in the next few minutes, please share your feedback on how you like this session on the link that is being provided to you. And thank you for giving us a patient hearing. Though I cannot see all of you in front of me, but at least I can feel that there are plenty of people who are eager to ask questions. And let me see if I can answer a few of them. Let's have the questions for now. Which are the questions? These are the questions. Okay. So now I've got the questions here. So the first question which I'd like to answer, which has come to me, which says, is there any criteria to select stem cells? I think this is a very important question. And of course, you should know it, because today you've stored the stem cells and we don't know when you'd be utilizing it. So there should be a criteria to select stem cells. Number one, every one of the transplanters have got a criteria by which they select stem cells. That is known as the total nucleated stem cell count. That means how many cells are actually contained in that unit which has been stored. Is that okay? No. You know, what has happened is, for ages, what we've been thinking that the stem cells which are there contains a very dark center known as the nucleus. And while people were doing the selection, which was under a microscope, they really could not differentiate between a stem cell and a normal white blood cell, because both of them contain the nucleus. So to us now, the criteria for selection is the total nucleated cell count, which also counts the WBCs, that is the white blood cells, and the stem cells, does not really make a difference, because the WBCs are never utilized to do a transplant or never participates in a transplant. So what is the next one? Next one is, can we select the stem cells? Yes, we can. But before selecting the stem cells, we should know how many of these are actually alive and they participate in the transplantation. So the next criteria which came in was the viability of stem cells. So the dead cells were deducted because they never take part in a transplantation. And what was used? The viable nucleated cell count was used. But even that was a misnomer. That was also a higher estimate. Then people went down to, let us actually count these stem cells. There they said the stem cells, if it is counted, it is known as CD34 positive cells. Let us have the population of CD34 positive cells. But, you know, after even selecting the finer population of the living or the viable CD34 positive cells, still 20% of the transplants landed up in failure. And people started wondering, what's the problem? The problem lay in the concept of every cell that is viable or living will be able to reproduce 3 different types of cells that is required for the forming of blood: red cell, white cell, and platelets. Actually, that is what we want the hematopoietic stem cell, the blood forming stem cell to do. Then there came the question of a second word that is known as potency. So this potency testing was being done and is now being done. If the cells are not potent, then at the end of the day, it will not be able to produce the red cells, white cells, and the platelets, because these are three different types of specialized cell which is required to be made by a stem cell. So not only have these stem cells got to be alive, but they have got to be potent. So the assay that was developed to see if the cells were potent or not was known as the CFU assay. The CFU assay is being done today, and this CFU assay is the final, what should I say, the final rung or the final test, which says today you go to a particular hospital, let's say to visit a particular person who's very critically ill, who's on a ventilator in an intensive care unit, and there is a glass partition separating you. You can see that those green lights are running. That means the person's heart is beating, and the person is on a heart lung instrument or a ventilator, which is actually pumping in blood and doing the respiration for you, for that particular person. That person is alive. And you on the other side of the glass, you can walk in, you can talk, you're also alive. But what is the difference between these two life states? You are alive and potent, you're alive and kicking, and that person is just alive. So think of these two populations of stem cells. One is just alive but cannot reproduce, is impotent, or is not able to make other cells. Whereas the person on this side of the glass, who's you are not only alive, but you're also kicking, you're also potent. You can make the other stem cells. You can make these stem cells to mature stem cells of tomorrow, that is the red cells, white cells, and platelets. So please, before deciding on these stem cells that are being given to you, not only is the total nucleated cell count important, not only is the viability or the alive cells that is important, not only number three, the population of the CD34 or the hematopoietic stem cells important, but the most important criteria is the CFU population or the potency testing. So once you have these three criteria ingrained in a report or in something that you want to transplant, only then you can think of a successful transplant. Next question which has come to me, it has said, the World Diabetic Day has passed. Please give us some information about the diabetic treatment in progress using cord blood. Okay, currently there are no diabetic clinical trials for diabetes which are ongoing, because all the ongoing trials which was going on for diabetes type 1 and type 2, it was being done at Duke's under Professor Dr. Geraldine Dawson, but they have been stopped due to the COVID pandemic, because everyone is scrambling to think of a therapy to overcome the COVID. But once that is done, the diabetic clinical trial protocol will go on running, and we should have some good results, because the preliminary reports that were shared and those were published had got good therapeutic response for type 1 diabetes, and we have seen that the HbA1c level comes down and the insulin requirement actually went down in the plenty of patients. But we are still waiting for the final call on this. The next question is, are there any other disorders that can be treated using cord blood apart from blood-related disorders? Yes, there are plenty of disorders now which are being treated. The commonest two which comes to my mind are cerebral palsy, autistic spectrum disorders. We've already talked about diabetes type 1. Then there are therapies which are going on for cerebral stroke. There are therapies which are going on for cardiac myocardial infarctions. In fact, there are certain tools which are coming in slowly, where the cardiac bypass surgery which was being done, where stents, which we call a CABG, that is the coronary artery bypass grafting, or we use stents. There are plans of using the cord blood derived stem cells within these stents to make these capillaries which will be potent and which will be able to relieve the patient of the myocardial infarction today and also prevent a myocardial infarction tomorrow. So these are the various therapies which are there in the pipeline. There are more than 40 plus disorders. I cannot name all of them, But the promising ones, which are, I think they're very shortly going to come into the books, leaving their impression in the journals where they would be under clinical trials till now. They'll be coming into the books, which will be there for cerebral palsy. It will be traumatic spinal cord disorders. There will be cartilage regeneration. There would be diseases like diabetes, myocardial infarction, heart attacks, cerebral infarction. Um, so the next question which has come to us, should someone consider storing stem cells? I mean, someone to ask this question, I think we should inculcate a particular feeling, we should inculcate a particular culture when everyone should be talking up, who should be talking about storage of stem cells every now and then, because stem cells are happening. Stem cells is the therapy of tomorrow. But when should someone start seriously thinking about stem cell? I think the decision should be taken about stem cell banking at the time when a person is planning to become pregnant, and no later than the second trimester of pregnancy. That is very important. Once this planning is done, they plan about storage of the stem cells, then they should go ahead, take the presentation, compare the banks, what they store, how they store. They should take the quality assessment by themselves and then go ahead. They should go ahead and store the stem cells once they have taken the decision and they have. Next, please help in understanding whether CFU gives healthiness or aliveness of stem cells only, or the total cells. Okay, I know I just introduced this topic, but whether there is a CFU actually stands for, the CFU actually stands for colony forming unit. If it is colony forming unit, that means I take one stem cell. Each stem cell should be able to multiply to at least 20 such primitive stem cells, and each of these 20 such primitive stem cells should be able to make one red cell, one white cell, and one platelet each. So if I've got one stem cell stored today, it should ideally be 20 such primitive stem cells once we grow it. That is the multiplication. And then the differentiation or the specialization should be at least 3 stem cells from each. So one stem cell today should be able to give rise to at least 20 red cells, 20 white cells, and 20 platelets from one umbilical cord blood stem cell, hematopoietic stem cell. That is what we actually talk about when we talk about CFU. But when we talk about total nucleated cell, as we know that the total nucleated cell talks about just the nucleated cells, and the stem cell or the hematopoietic stem cell is just a subpopulation of the entire stem cell population, entire nucleated cell population. We are actually doing a miscalculation. The dead, that is given by something known as the viability. But viability only gives you the impression if they're alive. If they're alive and kicking, that means if they're viable and vitality is present, if they're viable and potent, if each of them can make 20 stem cells out of one stem cell, and if each stem cell can create 20 by the CFU assay and by only the healthiness of these stem cells. Let us go to the next question. Cord blood banking as a medical insurance. Can you please elaborate on how? Okay. So what is a medical insurance to a layman's term? To a layman, a medical insurance is, go to hospital, I won't have to pay one paisa. I just go there, show my insurance card, and I'll be taken in, admitted, and my entire treatment would be free. That is what is medical insurance. But for cord blood or stem cell storage, I would not call it a medical insurance. I will call it a therapeutic insurance. What is a therapeutic insurance? That means tomorrow you land up, or someone in your family or a relative lands up with a disease or a disorder which can only be cured through a stem cell therapy. It might be in the form of transplantation, it might be in the form of transfusion, but a stem cell has to be used. So you start searching for stem cells. And stem cell is, the code of a stem cell is actually ingrained into your body by something known as HLA typing. This HLA typing ensures a match. The closest match to you is yourself. The next closest match to you is your sibling. The next closest match to you is your parents or are your parents. So if they are not a match, you'll have to search and search in the public repositories. And if the condition of the person requiring this therapeutic option to stay alive might not be alive at the time when the actual transplantable cell becomes available. Is it not better that today you have stored these stem cells, which are 100% matched towards you? It is stored in a cryogenic condition, which ensures that there is acceptable alive cells and there are acceptable amount of alive and kicking cells by which we call as potent cells by doing a CFU assay, and it is made available within 7 to 10 working days of you requiring the stem cells, and the actual transplant takes place without you waiting or searching for the stem cells. That is what we call a therapeutic insurance. So that is a small difference, wherein in insurance, general insurance, where a person insured might or might not live, but the amount of money his life or her life has been insured against becomes available to the family, so the family can live on that money. Whereas cord blood gives you just a reverse insurance. That means today, if you put in a small amount of money towards storing of the umbilical cord blood stem cells, tomorrow if you require it, these stem cells will be available to you at a doorstep in a way that it is usable at a very small span of time with almost no lag period. That is what we call a therapeutic insurance. Let us see what is the next question that is coming up. Relevant to opt for lifetime storage options? This is a controversial question, I should say, because by lifetime, lifetime of the individual whose cord blood is being stored, lifetime of some person who's a relative, or the lifetime of the cord blood. Today, with our extended storage protocols, we know that these cells can be stored, or if they're stored uninterrupted below minus 150 degrees Celsius, then possibly by statistical regression analysis, it has been proved that these cells can be viable for 10,000 years, or they may be potent for 10,000 years. So it's always an option if you want it to be stored for a lifetime. What is the option? What does this option mean? This option means if a cord blood is being stored today, the person for whom this cord blood is being stored, or of whom this cord blood belongs, is being stored, it will not only be an insurance proposition for this individual today, it may remain a treatment option for this individual tomorrow. Means till the lifetime of this individual, if there are segments of the cord blood which are there, which are stored, and tomorrow when this ex vivo expansion of umbilical cord blood is also coming into question, where we know that we'll be able to expand the cord blood, if amounts of which are used small amounts of which are used after an expansion, they can become a therapeutic option through the lifetime of this individual. And through the lifetime of this individual, this particular amount of cord blood or this cord blood unit actually remains 100% match. So I think it is relevant to go for opt for a lifetime storage option, because if this is an insurance and no one goes for a therapeutic insurance or a biological insurance with a half-hearted attitude that this is when this insurance is going to die out and after this I'll be left without an insurance. Because I remember just yesterday someone talked to me. There was a person whose mother and father, the father was working with the railways, and the railways before retirement gives an option that if you give a part of your money upon retirement, you will be having an insurance for the rest of your lifetime where you can be treated in the railway hospital at no cost. This person did not do it or were dilly-dallying on it and said that, okay, my son is working, my son's insurance policy covers for me. And that's the truth. My son's insurance policy covers for me, and the son was a software engineer with some company. And the son suddenly changed his job and went to another company and started a new job. No doubt it was a very reputed company or still is a reputed company. The son is still on job, but the insurance policy of the railways is not there because this person did not opt for it. The son's previous job's insurance policy is not there because the son has changed the job, and the person is now affected with COVID, cannot afford to get treated at a hospital because the son's new company has not yet given the insurance coverage. So I don't want a person who's storing the umbilical cord blood for 21 years and then realizing at the 22nd year that the person has got a disorder which can be used using cord blood, and the cord blood has been refused or has been denied storage by that same person, saying that cord blood was not used for 21 years. What is the option that will be used in the 22nd year? But now I've got a disorder which can be cured by it. But the cord blood is no more there because I have opted out of the storage option. So it's better to go for a lifetime. What is the next question? Is genomic prediction and precision medicine will be on the basis of human genome sequencing of cord blood DNA? Pretty bombastic words, but yes, it will be done through genome sequencing of the cord blood DNA. Let me tell you one thing. You know that the entire cord blood that is being stored is very valuable. Let us assure you today that the cord blood that is being stored will not be used for this genomic sequencing. It will be a small part of WBCs from the cord blood which will be used for this genomic sequencing, and the information will be stored, and it is not going to alter the status or the usability of the umbilical cord blood as it stands, but the genomic study will be made possible. What is the next question? Do we have any studies on kidney therapy using stem cell? As of now, I do not have any information which is straightforward on kidney therapy, though chronic kidney disease is one of the therapeutic options. Kidney transplants which have happened, where the umbilical cord blood and the cord tissue derived mesenchymal stem cells have been used, but all these are currently under clinical trials. We are still waiting for the results. That means to tell you that the jury is out. Once the jury comes in, we'll be able to tell you if it is on the cards or not. Are there any other questions? This is since you mentioned advancement in the terms of more and more ailments being treated, are there any advancements in the technology to extract as well? Oh, that's a very good question. I think at CordLife we are really not asking this question, because when I know I might sound a bit idiotic, but I always felt the first thing we did once we started Cord Life was doing manual extraction for umbilical cord blood, where we know that we'll be able to extract the maximum amount of cord blood when we do it manually. And then one technician who comes in the morning at 10 o'clock with a very fresh turn of mind has been successful in doing 99.99% extraction of the stem cells from the umbilical cord blood while doing it manually. And slowly he goes on processing the cord blood. Then before lunch, the 99.99% falls to about 95%. And before the end of the day, the extraction falls to about 92%. But all these are because he's human. Maybe he did not have a good lunch. Maybe he had a fight with his wife before coming to the cord blood bank to join the duty. Sorry, I'm only mentioning about wife. It might be a lady who's doing the processing had a fight with her husband while coming to cord life, and process the cord blood, only able to secure 95% of the recovery. That is why long back we went in for automated processing. We started with CPEX, the automated processing, where we could extract 98% stem cells from the cord blood by a robotic arm, which from hour 0 to hour 24 would be working tirelessly to keep up the same extraction, whatever be it the time of the day, whatever be it the time of the night. From there, we proceeded towards another new technology, which is again automated processing. There are two advantages to it. Because it's a robotic processing by AXP2, there the extraction is standardized. That means each and every one of the cord blood units gets about 98 to 99% extraction of stem cells, be it whatever be the time of the day. The viability, then the vitality that is being done through the CFU is assured, because none of the units are to be processed for a second time to augment the extraction. That is number one. Number two, never is the robot at fault. So if the robot is not at fault, then there is a similarity with all the extractions. And number three, most important is that these umbilical cord blood units are used, which will be used tomorrow, are being processed without an erythrocyte sedimentation enhancer by the name of hydroxyethyl starch. This hydroxyethyl starch has got a boxed warning. It is slowly going out of the market. It is a plasma expander. Most of the cord blood banks use this to extract maximum of the stem cells, but we do not, because it has got a boxed warning. It can cause kidney damage. It can cause some vascular anomalies. It can cause problems with blood cross matching tomorrow. That is why we have done away with these kind of processing, where no haste protocol and an automated protocol is used while processing the umbilical cord blood using AXP2, and the units are stored similarly. So there is no exhaustion, where robots or instrument are being used to process the cord blood, and there is no loss of potency, there is no loss of viability. The last but not the least is that the processings are done without an erythrocyte sedimentation enhancer known as hydroxyethyl starch. So are there any more questions? Please help in understanding the AXP technology fully automated like CPEX. Yes, the AXP technology and the CPEX technology are almost the same. Almost the same means both are automated. In fact, in CPEX, when we do this processing, we have seen that the extraction of the hematopoietic stem cells, or the cells which are supposed to make the blood or reconstitute the blood forming system, is much, much higher. And the system, both are almost remaining the same. But the CPEX has got a volume restraint to it, whereas the AXP has not got a volume restraint to it, and it selectively concentrates the mononuclear cells and the blood forming stem cells from the umbilical cord blood. What is the next question? Are there anything else? I have read the liability clause in the application. Cord Life is not taking liability of the stem cells in case they get damaged during transport. This is, I think, transportation, as I remember, is being done as a part of our client liability. So if the client wants to transport the umbilical cord blood, they can do it by any means they want. So if there is a damage during transportation, there is no liability taken by Cord Life. Saying that, I really know that in the last 13, 14 years of service that Cord Life has put into the whole industry, there has been no loss or damage in transit because Cord Life today takes into account the transportation which is done in a very thermoneutral bag. In the pandemic situation, it utilizes an environment where no doubt the cord blood remains safe, but we do not use the same box to transport someone else's cord blood that has been done for you. The cord blood, the cord tissue, and the maternal blood sample, which is transported, are transported at different temperatures that is conducive to their temporary storage during transit, such that they remain healthy, not only for the processing, but also for the testing that is expected of it. So, keeping all these things in mind, when you're doing cord blood banking, when you're planning to do cord blood banking, please also see how the cord blood and the maternal blood is being transported, because it is very well known that the cord blood should be transported between 4 to 37 degrees Celsius, whereas the temperature for transport of the maternal blood to be correct for testing that is required of it. That means the testing through serology or CLIA or ELISA, and the testing through nucleic acid amplification test on NAT, they require different temperatures, and the temperature requirement for the transportation of maternal blood is about 2 to 10 degrees Celsius. So they cannot be transported together, and they should not be transported in the same receptacle. If they are transported in the same box, they are not potent. So that is why once you go into the depths of transportation of umbilical cord blood, please look into if they are being separated while transportation, at they're maintaining different temperatures or not. That is what is going to determine the transplantability or the therapeutic ability of the stem cells tomorrow. I think those are all the questions. So I've been around for about 1 hour and 10 minutes. You must have become tired of me talking for so long. To share your having. One more question has come. Okay, sorry, you'll have to hear my voice for another couple of minutes. The question says, there are companies promoting community stem cell banking. Is Cord Life doing it as well? If not, then what? Okay, good. Uh, which is better for us? Okay. So, what is the ultimate aim of community banking? The ultimate aim of community banking is to have available for you an umbilical cord blood unit which is transplantable or usable at the end of the day when you require it. Wherever you get it from is not important, because it has to be matched, it has to be transplantable. So, what Cord Life is doing is, Cord Life is ensuring for all its clients means legitimate clients who have stored their umbilical cord blood successfully with Cord Life, is entitled to get a cord blood unit at the time of need from a public repository. Every other company is also assuring that they're going to procure a unit from a public repository. Any cord blood bank's own public repository I think, is far, far too small to cater to the needs of matched umbilical cord blood if the requirement so arises. And as far as a client is concerned, the client is interested in getting a cord blood unit as and when required as per the given norms. So if cord life is not transferring your own cord blood at the time of storage, that is 100% matched to you, and telling you that your cord blood is not there, but you're entitled to get a cord blood unit when you require it, is it a viable option? At Cord Life today, what we are telling you is your cord blood unit is there whenever you want to use it. It is 100% match for you. If you require it, or if you require another unit, if this unit is insufficient, if you require another unit, if this unit due to any cause has become important, or you require a fresh unit to be transplanted or for transplantation for any of your siblings or any of your parents or grandparents, during the tenure of the agreement, you will get it. Wherever we procure it from is our headache, but we will make it available, ensuring if you use it, if you require to use any of the cord blood units which has been procured by Cord Life through its insurance partners to make it available to you, still your unit remains your unit and is stored in the cryogenic storage tanks for any use for you in future. I think that is the best assurance. So if you know your unit is there, if you know XYZ is going to procure another unit from a public bank, and so is the assurance of Cord Life, I think it's very important to store that cord blood unit and go on storing that cord blood unit, which is 100% match for you, which is again that cord blood unit, which is potent, which is viable, and which is worth storing. I think I have made myself clear. So I'd like to close the session. Thank you once again. Happy parenting. Happy Cord Blood Day.